Within Disneyland in California exists one of the most beautiful experiences in the park, and is also known for its terribly unwitty humor: the Jungle Cruise. This fantastic attraction has stood for 70 years and was once the most unique theme park attraction in the entire world. The general public could see exotic animals and foliage in an environment that seemed authentic to the untrained eye. It was a way for America to explore the jungles of the world without ever having to take the treacherous journey to the real ones. During the design stages, Walt wanted the attraction to not only be fun, but also educational. In fact, the idea grew into a whole land, and it would emulate his true-life adventure documentary series. So, ideas were dreamed up for a Jungle River attraction in Disneyland's True Life Adventureland. Later, the name would be shortened to just Adventureland. This exotic land was often depicted as being on the park's east side, but once the 160 acres of land in Anaheim was acquired, Bill Evans, the Imagineer in charge of landscaping, had noticed a row of tall eucalyptus trees. They were originally planted by the farmers as a windbreak for protecting their precious walnut trees from the seasonal Santa Ana winds. Evans noted that the eucalyptus trees could still be used to protect the fragile jungle plants, and so it was decided to place Adventureland to the west of Main Street. Once construction began on the park, there was only 366 days to complete work before Disneyland would open. Walt Disney stated that delaying the park's grand opening was not an option. Bill Evans had immediately sent people from his company to buy up all kinds of exotic plants from local nurseries as far as Santa Barbara to San Diego, often exhausting the supply of each one. Evans had to start cultivating some vegetation from seeds, with the idea of planting the seedlings the day before the park opened. Meanwhile, with Imagineer Harper Goff at the helm of the project, a story goes that when the worker operating the backhoe had asked where to start digging out the river, Goff had examined his blueprints and then took a stick and drew out lines in the sand representing the banks of the river, and instructed the digger to carve out the space between the lines and pile the dirt up to create islands. Bill and his team were there from day one, salvaging as many orange and walnut trees as possible to see if they could be reused for the ride. Every day, shipments of trees came in from the nurseries across Southern California, but as the jungle was being planted up, Evans realized that there was still not enough. Bill Evans explained, "A longtime friend of mine was the head of Caltrans Landscape Architecture Division. He told me one day that they were planning to extend the Santa Ana Freeway, meaning that a lot of trees would have to be removed. Normally, he told me, they just bulldoze them out, crush them up, and burn them. But he kept me advised as to when the trees would be scheduled to go under the axe. We were able to get quite a few trees that way, including a lot of palm trees. The major palm trees that went into Disneyland's jungle came from the Santa Ana Freeway." But as available trees continued to become scarcer, Harper Goff and Bill Evans ended up scouting for full-grown specimens from property owners in Los Angeles and actually purchasing trees from right off their lawns. One banyan tree, which can still be seen near the Hippo Pool, actually came from a home in Beverly Hills. The story goes that when the two Imagineers knocked on the door, the property owner's wife answered. Apparently, the woman wasn't too happy with the tree and was willing to sell it to them, if they could have it removed before her husband got home from work. Indeed, that tree was transported by flatbed truck to Disneyland by the end of the afternoon. The landscape work for Disneyland wasn't done entirely by Bill Evans. In fact, there was a second landscape architect, and her name was Ruth Shellhorn. Ruth was making a name for herself by designing landscapes for commercial properties and the wealthy. She was referred to Walt Disney by Welton Beckett, and while Bill Evans was busy procuring plants for the park and focusing most of his efforts on the Jungle Cruise, it was Ruth who designed the more civilized and fanciful landscapes for other areas like Main Street, Tomorrowland, and Fantasyland. The original Jungle Cruise took up 8 acres of Adventureland, and while that is a lot more space than most rides in the park, that amount of land runs out real fast when you fill it with rivers, boats, and landscapes. Harper Goff had made it so the path the boats take through the jungle was quite convoluted. The boats would twist and wind through the jungle, and thanks to the use of plants and tall river banks, it was hard to tell that there was another boat less than 30 feet away, on the other side of the embankment. Imagineer Walt Rogers was assigned to create animated animals to populate the Jungle River. Originally, Walt Disney had wanted to use live animals in the Jungle Cruise, that way people could see the real things. But Harper Goff had talked him out of it, explaining that animals were unpredictable. They avoided open spaces when possible, they are hard to care for, many animals are great escape artists, and lastly, they often nap and lay about during hot weather. Now, Disney didn't invent robotic animals, but Walt Rogers certainly did help perfect them. The animals he created for the Jungle Cruise predated audio animatronics. There were no complicated mechanisms for running the movement of the animals. It was quite simple, actually. The team created a steel skeleton and attached a cam and lever system. Boats passing through an infrared beam would start the electric motors moving, and by adding an oddly shaped wheel that pushed against a lever, you could make the lever lift a hippo out of water or open a crocodile's mouth. It was all a really simple technology, but thanks to the art team's experience with Hollywood cinema, they knew how to sculpt realistic-looking animals, which is the most important aspect of an animatronic. In the early years, animatronics were often dressed with real fur or feathers. Back then, using real animal furs was the only way to achieve a realistic look. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, using authentic furs is expensive and doesn't stand up well to the elements. It wasn't until the year 1962, after Mark Davis's major revamp of the ride, that a new artificial taxidermist was selected to experiment with using artificial materials. This man was Bob Johnson. He was brought in to single-handedly man the position. The taxidermist the park used to employ left because he had no experience with artificial furs. So, Bob Johnson had to experiment with materials that could not only hold up to the elements, but be able to withstand constant movement from the robotic operation. You could say he is not only the reason Disney still uses artificial furs and feathers, but also wrote the book on how to design and maintain them. Harper Goff had designed the boats, drawing inspiration from the boat in the movie African Queen. It was up to Imagineer Bob Gurr to translate that design into a functional boat blueprint, then send the plans to Aero Development so they could manufacture the vehicles and their track. And speaking of track, the boats are designed to be guided through the sharp turns in the river using a single tubular rail hidden underneath the murky water. Aero Development came out to Disneyland with a pipe bender and bent each rail into the exact position they needed so the boats would fit between the narrow banks. The boats grip the rail with two sets of rollers, that way navigating the turns is always consistent. That being said, the boats really do float on the water. There is a mechanism built into the boat that allows the vessel to rise or fall by up to 12 inches. So things like high river levels or swells of water, or the constant loading and unloading of passengers don't put unnecessary strain on the guide rail below. One of the more exciting features of the Jungle Cruise is being able to pass behind a waterfall. The rockwork was drawn up by Harper Goff, then turned into a scale model by Fred Yerger. Goff then supervised the construction. The structure had a wood skeleton that was covered in a moisture-proof paper, and a layer of steel lath was wrapped over it. Gunite was sprayed over the steel lath to create a strong outer shell. Then a second layer of gunite was spread over it so the studio hands could sculpt it into rockwork. At the top of the structure is where water is pumped into a small reservoir pool, and from there it flows over the waterfall. Gunite was also used to line the riverbed so the water didn't get absorbed into the ground. Disneyland had opened to the public on July 17, 1955, and the Jungle Cruise easily became one of its more popular attractions due to its unique nature. When guests entered Adventureland, they found themselves in a small village that funneled into a dead end just beyond the Jungle Cruise. The main walkway was slightly narrower back then, with a very prominent riverboat landing complete with an observation tower. In the early days, guests were free to climb the stairs up to the top of the observation tower in order to peer out over the jungle and see all the boats navigating the tight rivers in the distance. When the Jungle Cruise opened, the experience was meant to be slightly educational and really more of a dignified tour of the rivers. But a famous story goes that Walt Disney once overheard a parent explain to their child that they didn't want to waste their ticket on the Jungle Cruise because they've already seen it. This disturbed Walt because he lived in constant fear of his park growing stale. Now, Walt used to dress in disguise and ride various rides at Disneyland to experience what his guests were seeing, and do it without being noticed, at least most of the time. When riding the Jungle Cruise, one day he noted that his skipper was a rather cheerful young man who, instead of reading off the dull script of the ride, decided to improvise and make some light-hearted jokes about the attraction. Walt realized that the skipper had succeeded in entertaining his little audience, and had done so without offense. At the end of the ride, Walt revealed his identity to the skipper. Naturally, the skipper was afraid that he had been caught breaking the rules, but was surprised when Walt thanked him for a fun and hilarious ride. That's when Walt approached Imagineer Mark Davis with the task of revamping the Jungle Cruise in order to add humor. And that's why the Jungle Cruise we ride today is humorous. To the west of the boat landing is a large Canary Island palm which dates back to 1896. That palm tree was one of two that stood out front of the Dominguez family farmhouse. When the family sold their land to Walt Disney, they had only one request, that the trees not be removed. Being the sentimentalist that he was, Walt agreed that the palm trees would stay. They were both moved near the loading area of the Jungle Cruise, and today, one can be seen next to the entrance building, while the other palm can be found on the little island on the other side of the Jungle Cruise boat dock. There are a total of 12 Jungle Cruise boats. Usually 2 are always sitting in the boathouse located behind Main Street, here next to the kitchen of the Plaza Pavilion. But even with 2 sets of tracks, the boathouse was not big enough to house all 12 boats whenever the river needed to be drained. In the early days, the boats could be towed through the canal that connected the Jungle Cruise with the rivers of America and stored in Fowler's Harbor, as you can see here. But when Pirates of the Caribbean was built, they paved over the canal, leaving just a simple 37-inch diameter underwater pipeline that still connects the waterways to this very day. If they want to drain the Jungle Cruise today, most, if not all the boats, would need to be removed from the river and transported to an open lot backstage. Originally, the boats ran on diesel fuel but were converted to run on CNG back in the early 2000s. The Jungle Cruise River is generally 4 feet deep. The guide rail for the boats sits 3 feet below the waterline at a consistent elevation, but in certain areas the river can be as deep as 6 feet to accommodate underwater animatronics or special effects. The 2 boats, Nile Princess and Ucayali Una, became wheelchair accessible in 1995. Some original bench seats were removed to make way for a rotating lift mechanism. All the boats were named by Imagineer Bill Cottrell, and you may have noticed that they bear the names of rivers from around the world. This boat landing definitely looks different now, and that's for a few reasons. The original boathouse was made of wood and was eventually damaged by termites. It was demolished sometime in the year 1962 and was replaced with a simple thatched queue that stuck around for several decades until they built the 2-story structure we know of today, just in time for the opening of the Indiana Jones Adventure in 1995. When they built the newest boat dock, they also pushed the loading area further towards the jungle by about 8 to 10 feet in order to optimize queue space and help widen the Adventureland thoroughfare, which was now connected to Frontierland, since the opening of the treehouse in 1962. The boats themselves also underwent a change in 1995 to better fit in with the new Indiana Jones ride next door. The boats went from pearly white with striped canvas tops to rusted and aged brown with cargo netting and worn canvas. The first bend of the river as you set off from the landing has always been the way it is, aside from the addition of large butterflies in the early 1960s. The boat used to continue on towards a hornbill bird taunting a crocodile. It was part of the 1977 Mark Davis overhaul of the ride. This scene was removed to make way for the queue area of the Indiana Jones Adventure. The hornbill, however, was saved and moved into the new queue area for the Jungle Cruise. Today, the bird is perched on the roof of Trader Sam's trading post. The next scene on the journey is the ancient Cambodian shrine. The shrine is one of the original scenes of the attraction, having been around since 1955, though it has been altered many times over the years. The statue in the center was eventually replaced with a monkey god during the first Mark Davis redo in 1962. In that same year, Mark Davis also expanded the temple ruins, only for the ruins to be downsized in 1995 during the river reroute. The Bengal tiger we all love was added in Mark's 1977 refresh. In early 2025, the tiger scene was completely revamped. There was also an area where several crocodiles could be seen in various forms over the years. The crocodile scene was eventually removed, and the space expanded to make way for the elephant bathing pool added by Mark Davis in his 1962 refurbishment. The camp we see today was non-existent before 1962, but now gorillas can be seen trashing the camp. During Mark's 1977 update, he added the gorilla we see around the corner, originally trying to strike a crocodile on the snoot, but the crocodile was later replaced with a floating crate of bananas. Further on down the river, another addition done by Mark Davis was the African veldt. This area shows an assortment of exotic animals gathering to watch the lions as they consume a freshly slaughtered zebra. This scene would later be changed so it would appear less gruesome. The lion cave was added in the late 70s, I'm guessing at the suggestion of Bob Johnson, likely because maintaining the lion furs is among the most tedious and expensive in the attraction. Right around the bend is one of the more hilarious scenes added by Mark Davis, the trapped safari, clinging desperately to a tree while an angry rhino attempts to give him a poke. The original rhinoceros that occupied the space prior to 1962 could be seen standing guard as her two young calves fled back to the safety of the underbrush. This scene was removed and an entirely new angry male rhino was sculpted. Actually, what's interesting was that this scene and the veldt was originally designed to be placed along the Disneyland Railroad. Walt just loved that thing, Mark Davis recalled. He said, "Mark, that's too good to use out there. Let's put that in the ride." So that's how the whole area, the African veldt, evolved. The trapped safari scene was updated in 2021 to feature a safari group of more varying demographics. Next comes the hippo pool. This area of the Jungle Cruise has seen the least amount of change. If ever there was a section of the ride where you could experience things as they were on opening day, this scene would be it. Well, except for one small but significant change. In the early years, when the hippo charged the boat, the skipper would shoot his gun directly at the animal. Today, the skippers just shoot their gun in the air instead in order to scare off the hippo. As our boat continues on, we come to the native village where the tribesmen can be seen performing a dance. This scene was technically a 1955 original. Back then it was just a small hut with some stationary native men standing motionless out front. In 1957, the dancing men were added. Imagineers, tour guides, and other Disney historians will tell you that the natives in the Jungle Cruise were created with molds taken from actor Woody Strode. The story goes that Harper Goff asked Woody to come down and get molds taken of his face and body. This story is true, however the story is missing a little context. The original natives, which were there since opening day, were molded using a different actor, but it was in 1957 when the scene was updated that they used molds taken from Strode, only to build the native men that are dancing in a circle. This scene was replaced in 2021 with chimpanzees monkeying around on the wreckage of the boat ahead of you. You should feel lucky you missed that one and boarded this one. The scene with the attacking natives used to be a little different. You would see the men peeking out from behind logs, trees, and rocks, presumably wary of the passing boat. For the 2021 refurbishment, the scene was changed to chimpanzees covered in an escaped collection of rare butterflies. Now we pass underneath Schweitzer Falls. This wonderful rock feature was designed with small pockets for climbing plants to be installed. This is the location of what is commonly referred to as the backside of water. It has changed little since 1955. The last section of the ride we see today didn't originally have piranhas. Instead, the grand finale was a close call with a giant crocodile. The crocodile was removed in 1957 to make way for a scene where a small herd of water buffalo were trying to cross the river. But then we end up spooking two gorillas on the opposite bank. These two upright gorillas were rather large and scary. During Mark Davis's 1977 update to the ride, he took the two gorillas out. Other Imagineers working on the 1978 refreshing of the Matterhorn took the opportunity to use these two discarded gorillas and redress them as the newly added abominable snowmen. Mark replaced the gorillas with a python in a tree. He rearranged the buffalo herd so it appeared as though the python wanted to make a meal of the buffalo calf, but was being fended off by the 3 others in the water. Those 3 buffalo in the water were taken out so they could install the piranhas in 2006, but a tribute to the lost buffalo can be seen in the form of a buffalo skull and skeleton pieces sitting atop rocks along the river. As we round the river bend, we see Trader Sam standing at the water's edge. Trader Sam is the head salesman of the jungle. He was added to the ride in 1957 as an ominous warning to not return to the rainforest. He received an upgraded body and costume in the 1962 refurbishment, but didn't acquire his little pachyderm friend until the 1994 refresh project. In 2021, he was replaced by his own trading outpost, although it has been taken over by macaques and a familiar hornbill. And finally, we make it to the most treacherous part of our journey, the return to civilization, of course. In 1955, this final turn towards the dock offered a wonderful view of the Adventureland Terrace. This place, of course, became the famous Tahitian Terrace in 1962, and then the view was painfully covered up in 1993 to be converted to Aladdin's Oasis. Thankfully, though, this area was revitalized and the view opened back up again in 2018 to become the Tropical Hideaway. The boats pull into the dock and are unloaded. In 1955, the boats used to only have one entry point, which made loading and unloading take longer, but the boats were given a second point of entry in 1956 to speed up the process. In recent decades, the concern over how much the boats lurch and heave in the water during loading and unloading has made Disney consider ways to stabilize the boats. In 2012, the boats were outfitted with new cleats to tether the boats to the dock. The idea is to imitate what they do for the big boats like the Mark Twain and the Columbia. Once the boats are tethered to the dock, the skipper has to run the engines forward at full power so the line is pulled taut, thereby supposedly steadying the boat. Well, the idea worked in theory, but the boats still heaved up and down due to the wake of other boats arriving and departing, therefore rendering the time-consuming practice pointless. Furthermore, the boats behind the tethered boat would also need to keep their throttles on because the tethered boat would push the ones behind it away. In the end, Disney did away with the tethering system and removed the safety netting. This is one of those rare cases where running things the way they did in the 50s is the best option. But that didn't stop the company from trying again. In 2016, new rubber bumpers on the sides of the boat appeared, and the dock was outfitted with rollers, as well as underwater rollers were placed on either side of the guide rail. The idea was that when a boat pulled up, the rollers underwater prevented the boats from sinking down too far when they heaved, and the rollers on the sides of the boat prevented it from lurching too far in one direction. This system works better than the tethering system, but still makes a minimal difference. Now let's talk a little bit about the plants. Bill Evans wanted to create a Hollywood-style jungle for Adventureland, dazzling people with assortments of vegetation and foliage that don't normally go together in the wild, but when combined, create a jungle you expect to see straight out of the movies. Oftentimes, Bill Evans resorted to fantastic measures to get the plants he wanted, often flying to countries in South America and sneaking plant seeds back to the US in his socks. He even created his own species of plant, which was later named after him, Philodendron evansii. In the jungle, you can find palm trees of several different varieties, climbing plants such as pothos plants, and spider plants. You can find bromeliads, banyan trees, golden goddess bamboo, fig trees, giant timber bamboo, giant ficus trees, and several dozen more species. The jungle was hard to take care of in its first 15 years. The delicate plants were not all used to the Mediterranean climate of Southern California, and for many plants, sunlight can be rather harsh. But once the large trees started gaining a high canopy, the smaller, frailer underbrush began to thrive. The key to Adventureland's successful jungle was the prominent use of giant timber bamboo in the early years. While it takes more than a decade for other trees to grow a large enough canopy to shade the smaller plants, bamboo tends to grow at incredibly fast rates. In some cases, giant timber bamboo can grow up to 4 inches in a single day. By the mid-1970s, the jungle had grown so large and full that it began to develop its own ecosystem. For instance, weather in Southern California can grow hot and dry during the day, and then become cold and dewy at night. These are deadly conditions for jungle plants, but once the canopy grew big enough, it trapped warm air during the day, causing the river to evaporate its water, which thereby made the hot air moist and humid. And when the cold nights came around, the sheer volume of plants, trees, and water continued to insulate itself with the warm air, and the moist night air prevented the humidity within the jungle from dissipating too rapidly. These combined conditions created a more stable environment. In recent years, a lot of the original bamboo groves planted in 1955 have started to be removed and replaced with other less invasive species of jungle trees. But in 2008, during the removal of the tallest section of giant timber bamboo, the horticulture team decided to measure the bamboo stalks. Some of the stalks measured over 90 feet in length, making it the longest measured bamboo stalks in the world. I've also been told the bamboo isn't the only species of plant in the Jungle Cruise that has been seen growing larger and more brilliant than it would in the wild. There's one simple answer for why the plants in the Jungle Cruise grow bigger and healthier than in the wild, and that is protection. On the Jungle Cruise, the plants are protected from parasites, natural disasters, disease, and clear cutting, but, well, up until recently at least. Now you might be wondering about trimming of the jungle plants. Yes, trimming back some of the overgrown areas is necessary to continue fitting the boats through these narrow waterways. And remember that row of eucalyptus trees that was originally planted by the farmers? Well, they had been living in the same spot through 6 decades of Disneyland, but one by one, they began to die of old age. In 2019, there was only one original eucalyptus tree left, and I had the unfortunate opportunity to watch it slowly die over the course of that year. It's long gone now. So how does horticulture trim the trees and plants? Well, they load themselves and their equipment into a Jungle Cruise boat and drive it out to the area they plan on working, often picking up tree trimmings and dead foliage and loading it into the very boats people sit on. To help get around, there are hidden trails on some of the islands that allow the horticulture cast members to easily access different points of land. Daily horticulture maintenance includes checking the water nutrient sensors for malfunctions and scooping up leaves out of the river with large pool nets. Another thing people don't know about is a hidden access road within the jungle. This comes as a surprise for Disneyland fans because everyone can see that Magic Kingdom in Florida has service roads right behind the Jungle Cruise, but most don't know that Disneyland has one. You see, in 1955, a service road was installed behind the Jungle Cruise, and it ran parallel with the Disneyland Railroad. Cast members and gardeners alike could walk from Town Square to Frontierland along this dirt road, but when Pirates of the Caribbean construction began in 1963, the west end of the road was seemingly blocked off, and cast members today can tell you that on the east end of that road is a massive concrete retaining wall that holds back the jungle. But yet, what happened to the road? Today, the dirt road can still be accessed from behind Pirates. Horticulture or maintenance teams can pass through the underground queue of Indiana Jones, and on the other side, the service road gives direct access to the African Veldt and goes all the way to the concrete retaining wall behind Main Street. At this point, you might be wondering how maintenance is done on the animatronics when the tree canopy is so tall and full, and when the waterways are so narrow. Well, here's an example. You can see that maintenance crews can bring out a helicopter and hook up the animal to a cable and fly it up and out of the jungle straight to an area backstage. This is a rare occurrence, simply because of how dangerous and expensive it is, but they do what is necessary to extract the animatronics from the jungle. The Jungle Cruise is a spectacular attraction, created by the men and women of WED Imagineering to delight and entertain guests from all over the world. Not many people can visit the real lush and often dangerous landscapes of actual jungles, especially not families with young children. The Disneyland Jungle Cruise has spent 70 years creating joy, stimulating adventure, and inspiring youth to go out and seek their own journey. It all stemmed from the imagination of Walt Disney and his desire to take us on a journey to the forested corners of the world. At Disneyland, anything was possible, and he put together a team of the most creative minds of the time to bring that dream into reality. Walt Disney's Jungle Cruise looks quite different today than it did during his time, but the boats he started down their meandering path all those decades ago continue snaking down those winding bends, a totem of our adventurous spirit.